Hey everyone, this is your host, Tori. We're going to do something a little different today. What you're about to hear is my interview with Sonny Ochs, Phil's sister. A couple months ago, I worked up the courage to reach out to her, and to my delight, she liked what I was doing with the show and agreed to sit down and talk with me. I am recording this intro on April 9th, 2021, the 45th anniversary of Phil's death. Something tells me he'd be thrilled to know that people are still interested in his story and his music. I'm going to give a trigger warning here. This interview contains discussion of suicide. I'm going to provide timestamps in case you need to skip ahead for your own comfort and safety. The first mention of suicide occurs in passing at about 1 hour, 10 minutes, and 45 seconds. And Sonny speaks frankly and in detail about Phil's suicide at roughly 1 hour, 18 minutes, 15 seconds. All talk about suicide and mental health ends at around 1 hour and 21 minutes and 15 seconds. Thank you all for listening, and thank you to Sonny Ochs for joining me on God Help The Troubadour. On with the show.
Just gonna do one song. Oh, I marched to the Battle of New Orleans at the end of the early British War. Young land started growing, young blood started flowing, but I ain't marching anymore.
Okay, so, to get the formalities out of the way, do you mind introducing yourself with your name and the reason why you're here with me?
Hi, I'm Sonny Ochs, and I'm here to talk with Tori about the wonderful job that she's doing helping to keep my brother's memory alive.
Stop. Thank you, Sonny. All right. Well, welcome to God Help the Troubadour. I'm ecstatic to have you here. Right off the bat, how would you describe Phil's personality?
The main word would be introvert. He
Mhm.
was very, very shy, very introverted, and that affected most of what he did in his life.
So, just from childhood into adulthood, always
All the way through.
shy.
Yeah.
How well did the two of you get along?
Well, didn't have that much interaction because I was almost 4 years older than he was. So he was like, the pesky little kid brother. And
Yeah.
but we didn't argue, we didn't fight, we never had problems like that. It was just basically lack of communication because of age differences.
Right. It seemed like he really looked up to you though, and kind of saw you as a source of wisdom. Would you agree with that?
I've been told that by other people. He never expressed it to me.
That's the impression I get, but I don't want to impose an image on there. So, would you mind telling me about your family and what life was like when you were growing up?
Well, we were quite a dysfunctional family. I had a mother who was very unhappy with her lot in life. She couldn't stand kids. She had 3 of them. And I remember very often on the weekend her saying to my father, "Take these damn kids out of here so I can have some peace and quiet." That was sort of her mantra. And it was kind of sad. I don't remember ever seeing my parents hug or kiss or hold hands. I mean, and by the time I was a teenager, maybe even before that, they had separate beds, twin beds or whatever. So there was really I don't understand what the relationship was. Constantly, it was just her nagging him about all the things he did wrong. And I mean, she came from an upper middle class family and was used to, her idea of poverty was being down to your last aid. And so she was very resentful of the fact that, they didn't have much money. My dad was a doctor, but not a successful one. He suffered with manic depression, which really messed things up a lot. He ended up taking jobs in various tuberculosis hospitals, and he would be in a hospital maybe 3-4 years and then get fired for doing something outrageous when he was in his manic stage. And then we'd move and he'd go to a different hospital. And so we moved a lot, which made it very difficult, particularly for Phil, because I was very outgoing. I could make friends anywhere. But poor Phil, it took him forever to make a friend. And he'd make a friend and then we'd move and he'd have to start all over. So that was really rough. Dinner time was interesting. 5 people, 3 kids and the 2 parents, sitting at the dining room table, each of us with a book propped up in front of us. No conversation. Really dysfunctional. And you have to understand, you have to put it in perspective with the time. This was the time when Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, the Donna Reed Show, all of these shows that had the perfect families where they always solved their issues easily. Dad was always the boss. Mom was always the home caretaker. And I looked at that and I thought, we must be weird because we're not like that. We must be odd. Little did I realize at the time, I had nothing to compare it with, that most people were dysfunctional, and that what we were seeing on television was really the odd stuff.
Right.
As the norm, and I don't think very many families lived up to it.
So, do you have any favorite memories or early memories of Phil as a kid?
Well, like I said, I really don't remember him that much.
Right.
He was very quiet, and he was never a bother or anything. He wasn't in my face or anything like that.
Right.
We just kind of led different lives.
What about when he almost burned your house down?
Well, he was I'm thinking around 9 years old.
Okay.
And we were going out shopping to some department store, and he didn't want to go. So my mother figured, okay, if he's quiet, he's not a troublemaker, she could leave him home alone, it wouldn't matter. We'd only be gone a couple of hours. And he ended up being a troublemaker, but not on purpose. What happened was he and my brother shared a bedroom, and my mother's clothes were in the closet in that bedroom. That was her closet. And their toys were on the bottom of the closet in boxes. And he wanted to get a toy out, and he couldn't see because there was no light in the closet, or he couldn't reach the light switch, whatever it was. So he decided, well, I'll light a match, and that way I can see what I'm looking for. So he lit a match, and it accidentally caught on the bottom of one of her dresses or nightgowns or whatever, and whew, there was a fire going in the closet. Now, as I said, Phil was painfully shy, so he couldn't just run out the front door and say, help, help, there's a fire. Didn't think about calling the fire department, didn't know how to do that. All he could think of was the people who used to live next door who had now moved around the corner, around the block. So he ran out the door, ran up the block to the house of these people, and he went running in the front door, and my friend, who was my age, Patricia, was on the telephone, and Phil came running in the door, Patricia, my house is on fire. And she knew Phil, and she knew he wasn't kidding, so she hung up on whoever she was talking with and called the fire department. And when we came back to see the fire trucks in front of our house, and I was like, whoops, what's this all about? He didn't admit it till several years later, but that's what happened.
Can you talk more about your mother a little bit and just kind of his relationship to her?
Well, my mother was a follower of fashion, reading, movie magazines and looking at all the beautiful people. And that was her criterion in life. What's the most important thing is how you look, how pretty you are. And whenever we would bring friends home, when they would leave, she'd say, that one's awfully plain looking, or that one's very pretty, or whatever it was. And that was her standard of judgment. And it was very hard because Phil was a very plain looking kid. So he knew that he didn't meet the standard. And I'm sure that didn't help with his shyness, He wasn't good enough. And it was rough on him.
Did she ever say anything about his appearance to him or anything like that, or just?
It was understood.
Oh, okay. It was all unspoken. I see.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about your dad, about Jack?
My father was very quiet. Well, he was manic depressive, so he was depressed most of the time. And we didn't know that. I didn't see him as depressed. I saw him as quiet. He was very quiet. And my mother ruled the roost. I mean, she was unbelievable. Everything, she told him what to do, and she was constantly criticizing. You said the wrong thing here, you did this wrong, blah, blah, blah. And like I said, it was a pretty loveless marriage from my viewpoint. And my dad and I were close for a while. When I was growing up, I was a real tomboy. I was my father's favorite son. Because neither of my brothers were interested in sports. They didn't like to watch it. They didn't like to play anything. They just were not that way. And I loved to play baseball. I loved to play. We played tag football and all different. And we used to play roller derby in 8th grade. And my dad would take me to games. When I was in high school, he took me to a wonderful track meet when we were up near Buffalo. I got to see a guy, you wouldn't know him, his name was Harrison Dillard. He was a hurdle jumper. And then Bob Richardson, I think, was the pole vault champion. So I got to see these people in person because I went with my dad because he loved watching it and so did I. So he and I were pretty close.
That's wonderful. So you said that Gertrude was very judgmental of people, and it was just kind of an unspoken thing that, she was also judging her own family. Do you think that contributed to Phil wanting to get a nose job at 17 years old?
Oh yeah, for sure. He wanted to be good looking, so he could meet her standards. And he asked her, and she of course, she's the one that makes the decisions. My father didn't make any decisions. So she was at odds. She was thinking, what should I do? What should I do? So instead of asking my father, she asks me, what do you think I should do? And I was about, 20 at the time. I said, for heaven's sake, if it means that much to him, let him do it. Dad's a doctor. Doctors give professional courtesy to each other. So if it costs you anything, it'll be very little. It won't be a large expense. Make him happy. Let him have the nose job. And so she did. Do
you remember what he said exactly about it or anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just knew that he wanted it, and I said to her, do it. let him do it.
I don't get the impression that Gertrude was very supportive of Phil's career, but she was present at a lot of his milestones. Like, she was at the first Carnegie Hall show.
Well, she thought it was a ridiculous career to pursue. I mean, here he went to college. He should get a job that paid, not being a silly singer or whatever. Mm-hmm. I mean, but as he got more and more recognition, she kind of accepted it. And it's so funny. I went to Brooklyn College at night for 7.5 years. And at one point, I was the driver for a carpool of people who were going from Rockaway to Brooklyn. And my mother decided to take some adult ed course at the high school, which was right near Brooklyn College. I think it was Midwood High School. So she was part of the carpool. And I'll never forget, we're riding up to Brooklyn, and this one woman, she said, hey, this is my mother, glad to meet you, blah, blah, blah. And they got talking about kids. And so the woman, my mother says to the woman, so what does your son do? Oh, he's studying nuclear physics. And what about your son? He's a folk singer.
So any kind of support she showed was almost kind of at an inkling of success on his part, just the fact and since she viewed status as being so
Yeah, well,
important, that's
once she started to make a name, then she accepted it, you know.
so he always kind of wanted to be a performer, right? He wasn't,
Well, he
at
was
least from a younger age.
obsessed with movies. He was obsessed with movie stars. And hey, what kid doesn't want to be a movie star at some point in their life growing up, you know?
Yeah.
Somebody famous, you know? Everyone wants to be famous, you know?
Mhm.
So that was part of it. And he didn't achieve, I guess he wanted to be a lot more famous than he was, but he, you know, he did I think, very well for the kind of music that he did. And I don't know that it was ever fully satisfied, but I know that, you know, he knew that he had made a mark.
Do you think there's potential for more of a revival, even long after he's been gone, of his music? Maybe him being bigger now than he ever was before.
You know, more and more young people like you are finding out about him, and I hear from a lot of young people. Either they're writing papers about him, or they're studying him, or some people are teachers and they're teaching their students Phil's music, you know, the songs. And he is making a big mark now. I mean, think about it. He's been gone 44, 45 years, and people still are singing, recording his songs every year. There's a couple of 2, 3 new recordings. And there's a gentleman in Wales named Martyn Joseph, who's an incredible performer. He's been around for about 20 years. He just put out a whole CD of Phil's songs called Days of Decision. SONiA from Disappear Fear, she put out a whole CD called Get Your Phil, Phil. Pat Wictor, who's an amazing musician, put out a CD of Phil's songs called This Is Absolutely Real. I mean, it's the fact that these people are taking the time to do this, there's something there. He definitely hit a spark with people. You know, 2 biographies have been written about him. And both of the biographers, Mark Elliott and, I can't believe I'm blanking.
Michael Schumacher.
Thank you, Michael Schumacher, who wrote There But for Fortune. Both of them told me the same thing, which was that the people they were interviewing really, they could tell that they really cared about Phil. They really loved him. And it really mattered to them what had happened to Phil, you know. And they said they didn't see that with other interviews that they did, because he was such a genuine, real person. There was no front, there was no, you know, stage persona or any of that.
Right.
He was him.
In spite of his kind of introverted, soft-spoken nature, he was still able to create connections with people.
Right.
How do you think how do you think Phil would feel about young people connecting with his work so long after he's passed away?
I think it would give him such a thrill. And some of the renditions of some of the songs that he wrote, I always say, I wish he had lived long enough to hear Kim and Reggie's version of What's That I Hear. I mean, they took that to such a different level. They changed it, the whole tempo. They changed it into a Motown song, and it just gave it a whole new, you know, dynamic. And I often wish that he could have heard them sing that.
While we're on the music, so I asked some listeners if there was anything they'd like to hear from you. So this question is from a listener. What specific issues today do you think Phil would be writing about?
Oh my God, you're kidding. What wouldn't he be writing about? He could write a whole opera about the ex-moron we had for president. There's enough material for a whole show there. Definitely immigration for sure. And, COVID. I mean, the unnecessary deaths, the murders committed by our ex-president, by not doing anything about it. The health situation, the lack of ability of people to have health care. I mean, you can go on and on. Every main issue of the day he'd be writing about. I rarely think the migrant issue because, well, he did write that wonderful song, Prasada-Rao, about how migrant workers are treated here.
Exactly, yeah.
He was very empathetic. He really felt for the poor people.
Still on the subject of music, this is another listener question. David in Bend, Oregon. Thank you, David. David wanted to know which song of Phil's speaks to you personally, and if there's a lyric that jumps out to you and makes you think, that's my brother.
Well, the song When I'm Gone, which is a song that we close all our song nights with. Funny, the first time I ever heard him sing it was at the first Carnegie Hall concert. That was, of all things, that was his encore, which is surprising when you think about it. About 1966, he's talking about When I'm Gone. And that song says it all to me because it's, it talks about some of the things that we're dealing with. And I guess I'll have to do it while I'm here because I can't do it when I'm gone. In other words, it's a call to the people to be active, to get out and protest, to get out and do things to try to help people. And you can't do it once you're gone. You have to do it now. Mm-hmm. So that speaks to me very strongly.
I really personally connect with those call to action kind of songs, and When I'm Gone feels almost like the most genuine out of them all, where it's really coming from his heart. Are there any lesser known songs that you wish got more attention?
Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, I recommended when Martyn Joseph said he was going to put the album out, he asked me for suggestions. And one of the songs that I suggested to him was the Ballad of Lou Marsh. And he did it. And it is so beautiful. It's one of my favorite on his CD. And it's the story of a social worker in, well, it's not Harlem. I think it's more the Bronx. And he worked with gang members. And he saw a fight coming. And he tried to break it up, and they killed him. They stabbed him, and they kicked him, and he died trying to break up a fight between gang members. But the reason I love that song, the chorus is so poignant. It's, now the streets are empty, now the streets are dark. So keep an eye on shadows and never pass the park. For the city is a jungle when the law is out of sight, and death lurks in El Barrio with the orphans of the night. Talking about, I guess it shows empathy for the gang members. I mean, they're the orphans of the night. These are kids who have no home life. These are kids who basically live in the streets. And so he's not calling them cold-blooded murderers. He's calling them what they are, the orphans of the night. And I taught in I substituted her summer in a local division for youth prison near where I live. And the kids that were in that prison, a lot of them, this was so sad, just about when it was time for them to go back home, they would do something bad so that they would be kept longer. They didn't want to go home because they really didn't have a home to go to.
Right.
Because things were so terrible, where they were growing up. So that song really, really hits me because I've seen it, for real. I've seen the kids that come from places like that.
Wow. The lyric in that song that really stands out to me, and I love the chorus, of course, but I really love the lyric, shed a tear on poverty, tombstone of us all.
Yes, that's another great line.
It's
extremely
true. Poignant.
As long as you have poor people in God, do we have them now? It's always been there. I mean, you go all the way back to Les Miserables when Jean Valjean has a sister whose kid is starving, and he steals a loaf of bread.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up in prison for 20 years. I mean, poverty, the tombstone of us all. It's still going on. What they say now, I think 1 in 4 kids goes to bed hungry now in our country, the richest country in the world.
Mm-hmm. I always appreciate the empathy that he shows for people in his songs, especially in songs like In the Heat of the Summer, which we essentially just had that summer again in 2020.
Right.
I find myself, I find lyrics running through my head of his whenever I read the news. It's incredible.
The song is There But for Fortune. I mean, if you think about it, your life is an accident of birth. Depending where you're born, what country, what city, what area you're born in, who your parents are, what you're born into. You can be born into tenement living, you can be born on a farm, you can be born in a city, you can be born, I mean, I think about this often if I drive through these small towns across the country. These people happen to have been born in these rural towns, and a lot of them never even go away from their towns. They live their whole lives there. And just think how different their lives would be, let's say, if they were born into a war-torn country like Sudan. I mean, think how different your life would be. Your life is so much just an accident of your birth. And I was lucky, I mean, aside from being obnoxious parents, at least I never went to bed hungry one day in my life. I always had a roof over my head. And these are the things that people take for granted. And they're not a given for so many people. And Phil saw that. I mean, he felt for the miners, the coal miners. I mean, think about that life. Going down into the mine every day, breathing in the coal dust and knowing that you're going to end up with some kind of pulmonary disease. And yet they keep going because they need the money.
Right.
What was that line? Mining is a hazard in Hazard, Kentucky. There you go. And then the other one that I really love of his that I wish more people would play is No Christmas in Kentucky. The jingle bells don't jingle when you're poor. That's a great line.
Yeah. How do you feel about his more introspective, less topical music? The things that are more featured on the A&M albums, like Pleasures of the Harbor.
Pleasures of the Harbor, to me, I was just listening to it again the other day. It's like a movie. It is so descriptive, and some of the lines in there, she's counting up the coins he's swallowed by the night. Some of those lines are just incredible, just absolutely so moving, so beautiful. And as I said, to me, that's a whole movie, that song. And another one that I think is on the same album that I don't think it gets any play. I love it, is The Party. The description of the individual people, the descriptions are absolutely amazing. The wallflower, as long as she hides behind composure, she loves to dance but prays that no one asks her.
I love The Party. Musically, I tend to gravitate toward a lot of his more introspective stuff in the A&M albums. That doesn't mean I don't love his topical stuff, because I do. But it's nice to get an idea of the kind of person he was, and I think a lot of his lyrics really shine in those songs. His poetry, especially in things like Changes.
That's a beautiful song. That song at one point, I don't know what the story is now, but at one point that was the most recorded song by other people than any other. I'll tell you who recorded it, which is surprising. Tony Rice. He's a bluegrass guy.
Cool. So, the more research I do, the more of Phil's footprints I find, especially on the 60s. He's just kind of, the more you look into him, the more he's just kind of there at all these turning points and these events, and with all these different iconic people of the time.
Stephen King wrote a book called Hearts in Atlantis, which was made into a movie, and Phil is mentioned several times in that book. So there you go. You never know where he's going to turn up.
Exactly. Yeah, he was mentioned once in It, I believe, as well, which is interesting. But he's still kind of he's still consistently underrepresented or left out entirely from media about the 60s. Most recent example is the Trial of the Chicago 7 movie, and how there were points where I think they could have easily mentioned him or included part of his testimony, and they just didn't. And I wonder why. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I don't know. He was often underrated because at the memorial that we did for him, William Kunstler talks about leading him through his testimony at the Chicago 7 trial, and what a great piece that is. I mean, he really was funny. He brought out the humor of it, and I'm surprised they didn't put. Well, I guess they wouldn't put it in the movie because it was too light. It was, you know, the winners write the history books.
That's true. That's very true. So you've been organizing and hosting Phil Ochs song nights since 1983. What made you want to do this?
It started out quite by accident. It wasn't a planned thing. There's a club in the Greenwich Village called the Speakeasy, and it was a musicians cooperative. People like Christine Lavin and Rod McDonald, Dave Van Ronk were part of it. I guess Lucy Kaplansky hung out there, a whole bunch of the village musicians. And I got a phone call one evening from a guy named Ned Trainer, who was part of the group. And he said, look, he says, we thought it might be fun to do an evening of Phil's songs here at the Speakeasy. Would you be interested in coming down and joining us? I said, I would love to. You have to understand that I usually never went into the village. I'm not a city person. And I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. I mean, not my scene, But I figured, what the heck, I'm going to go in for this because they're talking about Phil's music. This was 83. He had died in 76. So this is, 7 years after he'd passed. And I thought it was very important for his songs to be heard. They're good songs. So I went. And it was rather disorganized. Different people got up and sang Phil's songs. It was great. It was all just Phil's songs. And a lot of people would just do one. Most of them only did one. And then the next year, I get a call again. They said, that was so much fun last year. Let's do it again. So I said, okay. And I said, well, could I invite Joe Hukerot? Could I invite different people that I knew from the Hudson River Sloop Singers, because I was singing with them at the time. And whoever I asked if I could invite, they said yes. I was never told no. And I get down there, you talk about a circus. I don't know how late that show ran. I left at 11 p.m., and there was still a load of people who hadn't been on yet. And I had an hour's drive to get back to Rockaway, so I wasn't going to hang out any. I'm not a late night person. So by the third year, I had started working at Folk City. I was the Monday night host for the open mic every other Monday at Folk City. So I decided, this year I'm going to do it here at Folk City, and I'm going to be in charge. And I'm going to choose who sings. And I put together a really powerful show. You can't believe the people I had in that one. I think Paxton and Van Ronk. I think Eric Anderson was there. Melanie, Happy Trow, Rod McDonald. I mean, I had one hell of a lineup there. And it was really a good show. And then the next year, same thing. But then after that, I moved upstate. I moved up near Albany. So the fifth year, I guess, I moved it up to Albany. There's a club called the Eighth Step. So we did it there. And then it became an annual thing there. And then also I had friends in Boston. They said, why don't you do one here? Okay. And then I had friends in Philadelphia. Could you do one down here? Sure. So I mean, instead of being just once a year, it started to spread out. I mean, there were years we did lots of these shows. We did the Bottom Line in Manhattan. We did, a whole bunch of shows. And then we started going further down to Washington, D.C. and all over the place, and eventually out to the Midwest. 1996, we did about a 10-day tour, 10 different cities, one right after the other. And then we did the West Coast, and then we did some up in Canada. I mean, it just spread and spread. And it's still going on. I haven't missed a year yet. And even last year with the pandemic, we did, they were virtual shows. There was one at the Woody Guthrie Center, and then there was also one at a coffee house down in Westchester County. That was originally planned as a live show, and then of course it was in April and we couldn't do it, so we did it online. So we did manage to get 2 shows in this past year, and I've done it at many festivals. I've had Phil Ochs workshops up in Canada in particular. I mean, it just everywhere. So I'm very proud of it, and I'm planning on doing at least one this year. I got to keep it going. Can't let it stop. And the format has been all over the place. We started out, we used to do about 12 acts, and so the shows were awfully long. So then I cut it to 7 acts, each doing 2 songs, one of Phil's and one of their own, plus the opening and the closing. And then somebody came up to me and said, he said, I'm kind of disappointed. I came here to hear Phil's music, not to hear these other people. So I thought about what he said. And the reason I wanted them to do their own songs is that there are a load of good songwriters today writing good political music. And I wanted to share that with the audience. Most audiences love it, because they get to hear new stuff. So I changed the format again. I made it 5 acts. 3 songs each, 2 of Phil's, 1 of their own. And that was the format for quite a while. And now as I'm approaching 84 next month, getting a little tired. So the last couple of years, maybe 3 years now, 2 of my regulars who have been with me forever, Greenway and Reggie Harris. Greg has kind of taken over the programming, and he cut it down to 4. It was Reggie, Greg, Pat Wictor, and Tom Prasada-Rao. And the 4 of them do it, but not 4 individual performers. They do it as a quartet. So you have the harmonies, you have the different instruments, because Tom plays the fiddle, Pat plays the slide guitar, Greg plays piano. So you have different instruments in there. So it's much, it's much fuller in many ways. But of course, I had somebody complain to me, where are the women? You always have a critic, right?
You're right.
This is a valid point, it really is. So at one point, I think I forgot what happened. Tom got ill. So we threw in Colleen Kattau. So we threw in a woman to replace him while he was ill. But it's still going on, and I'm very proud of them. And I've done hundreds at this point.
Right. Your reputation precedes you there. You're kind of legendary. I get messages from people telling me that they've been to your song nights, and unfortunately, where I am, they don't happen much out here in Iowa.
I'm trying to think. I think it was Davenport. It was an art building. It was where they had paintings and stuff up on the wall, and it was 2 guys who owned it. And we were there on that tour I mentioned with the 10 shows. That was one time we were there, and I think we came back again at least one other time, maybe even 2 other times. And I'm pretty sure it was Davenport.
If you did it in 96, I would have been a year old.
Well, I still have the tour jacket.
Wow. I'm surprised my dad didn't drag me out there. Wish I could have been at a Phil Ochs song night at a year old. I wouldn't have remembered it, but
Look good in your resume.
Yeah. I've been to one. It was a birthday celebration in Cedar Rapids, and they screened the documentary, and they wanted people to sing, and I was the only person that volunteered.
Wow.
So I ended up, after they screened the documentary, with tears in my eyes because yeah, um, I played Draft Dodger Rag and Half a Century High and Pleasures of the Harbor.
Wow.
Um, yeah. Very rarely where I am do I get to be in a room full of people who appreciate Phil as much as I do. So I cherish those memories. Um, so you mentioned modern artists and doing original work, and you named some people who did covers, but can you name some modern artists who retain the spirit of Phil in their music and their own original music?
Definitely. Well, I will start with John Flynn. I absolutely, if you haven't heard John Flynn, you have to check him out. The two CDs that I love the best, one's called Two Wolves, and I can't think of the name of the other one. Oh, good heavens. I'll email it to you. But his stuff is so powerful. I love his writing. And he works with prisoners he lives in Delaware, and he works with prisoners. And he just goes in and they have talk groups. And his group is called New Beginnings. And the recidivism rate in that prison is 70%. And his group, the recidivism rate is something like 27%. I mean, he's making a difference. And then what happened was, after a while, he got a phone call from a guy who had gotten out, served his time. And he begged him, he says, John, please, we have to meet on the outside. It's very difficult, being out like this. And so they now have outside groups meeting, and other people are starting to come in and do that kind of work. His work is spreading, and it's just a beautiful thing to see. But John Flynn is I really love his stuff. Greenway has not a lot of political stuff, but the stuff he does is like Standing on the Side of Love is a beautiful song, Greenway. Reggie Harris, of course, and he does a lot of stuff with, civil rights. And he's part of a group called Living Legacy, and they take tours down to the South, to the places that were relevant during the 60s movement. Pat Humphreys, well, she's now half of Emma's Revolution, and she's written some great stuff. Gosh, I should have written a list. There's a million of them out there. Tom Prasada-Rao writes great stuff. I think I told you about his song, come on, Sonny. Oh, $20 Bill. Oh, no, it wasn't you. I know who it was. It was a group down in Florida. Okay, Tom Prasada-Rao wrote a song called $20 Bill, which is about George Floyd. That is such a powerful song, and now people are all over. Ellis Paul just recorded it. It's being recorded. That song, I think, was #1 on the charts in the folk DJ world for 2020, and it's been recorded by more people than any other song.
Wow.
Because it's gut-wrenching, and so definitely Tom, that's Prasada, at Prasada-Rao, R-A-O, Tom Prasada-Rao, $20 Bill. Check it out on YouTube, it's there. And Colleen Kattau, her main interest is, she does Nueva Canción. She does, like songs about Central South America, but also other stuff as well. And she's been in a lot of the song nights. Naturally, Paxton. I mean, to me, Tom Paxton was one of the best because he used humor as his tool. He'd get you a laugh and go to his show, laugh your head off, and then come home and realize what he was saying. That he was talking about a lot of stuff. Very important.
Phil used a lot of humor in his music as well.
Yeah, well, William Worthy, I mean, there's the case in point.
Yeah.
That song changed a man's life.
William Worthy, the talking songs, Outside of a Small Circle of Friends,
Right.
a lot of just this great satire that gets his point across. And he's so graceful with it that it rarely comes off as tasteless. It's getting you to laugh at these serious subjects, but also think about them, which is it's very difficult to do, I think. Do you think there's any potential for a mainstream revival of topical music and protest music that was similar to the 60s?
I really don't know because so much of the music has been taken over by corporations. I mean, it's a whole different scene now. It was back in the day, in the 60s, the record companies, they really screwed the artists. You know, and I can think of when Phil was with Elektra, they were selling his albums for $4 each. And Phil was getting, on each album sold, he was getting 28 cents, 14 cents, one for each song he wrote, and one for a penny for each song he sang. Where did that other money go? You know? And so many of the performers, they're smart. They're just, another performer, Holly Near. She's my goddess. I love her. She's still performing. She's still out there. So people who, you should listen to. My favorite song by her is called I Ain't Afraid. I ain't afraid of your Allah. I ain't afraid of your Yahweh. I ain't afraid of your God. I'm afraid of what you do in the name of your God.
Wow.
That's a great song. I Ain't Afraid by Holly Near. If she never wrote another one, that one is amazing. She opened for Phil way back in the 70s, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. She told me she opened it. And when I had my 70th birthday, I had her come here and do a concert. And she sang that song, I Ain't Afraid. Just powerful, powerful.
Kind of shifting the conversation here, a listener and regular podcast guest, Mackenzie, you heard her on the first episode. She was curious about this. So, as you know, Phil was monitored by the FBI for 13 years, from 1963 until after he died, even. When did he first say something about it to you, and what was your reaction?
Oh, he knew he was being tailed. And when he came to live with me, I'm sure my phone was tapped. And I'd pick up the phone and say, hey, you guys, aren't you getting bored with this junk you're listening to? That's the FBI guys. Well, I know that he knew. Yeah.
I know that he kind of reacted to it, or started letting on that he knew as early as even 65. Do you think he knew even earlier than that, or?
I don't know, I really don't. All I know is that he had a very harrowing experience. He went down to Uruguay, I think with, I forget who he went with.
David Ifshin?
David Ifshin. And he was speaking, Ifshin was going to be speaking at University of Montevideo, and Phil went with them. And while they were there, a student, whatever, protest broke out, and the police came, and Phil and David got arrested. And they got questioned and what have you. They ended up getting put on a plane to Argentina, and somebody warned them. They said, because they were trying to get to Peru, and somebody warned them. They said, "Don't get off the plane." And so they spoke to the pilot, and they were allowed to stay on the plane when it continued on. And they looked out the window, and they saw the CIA guys on the ground waiting for them to come out because they could arrest them. But they got away. But yeah, they were definitely on his trail. Well, you've seen the FBI file. It's a joke.
Right. Yeah. That had to be terrifying for him, I'm sure. He seemed to be almost amused by it at first, but after a decade, that'll wear on you.
It gets old, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing we really should talk about, and that's Broadside Magazine.
Yes.
I can't tell you how important that was for Phil, and for a lot of other people too, actually. Broadside Magazine was maybe 8 mimeograph sheets stapled together. It was so unprofessional on one level, but the way it was put together, they had clips from the New York Times, they had articles that matched, all the songs in there were political. All of the guys who wrote back in the 60s, Phil, Eric Anderson, Bob Dylan, Pete Seeger, Jimmy Collier, I know I'm leaving a lot of people up, Janice Ian, before she was Janice Ian, Janice Fink was her actual name. So there's songs in there by her. I mean, just everybody who was writing, their songs were in Broadside. And what they would do, there was Sis Cunningham and her husband Gordon Freeson, and they were very poor people. They were real left-wing sympathizers, and it was Pete Seeger who talked them into starting the magazine. And these performers would go up to their apartment. They didn't have a house; they just had an apartment, and they had a Wallensack reel-to-reel recorder. And the performer would sit down at the living room couch and sing their new songs into this recorder. And Sis would transcribe them and then put them into the magazine. And I mean, all of those people, all of the well-known people, all of their first songs were in Broadside Magazine. And Sis and Gordon just absolutely loved Phil. They were his real parents. I mean, they loved him. And they gave him what he needed, the recognition, the encouragement, what have you, the praise. He got that from them. They actually published, I think, 69 of his songs were in Broadside Magazine. And the first time Broadside, as it got a little bit fancier, the first time they ever had a picture on the cover, it was Phil. It was issue number 36. You can see the Broadside Magazine. You go to, I think it's the Smithsonian. They have all of the Broadside magazines. So do I.
I've got number 36 on my wall.
That's all. It has his picture on it. That's the first one that has his picture on it. And but they were so helpful and so encouraging. They're both gone now, of course, but I'm glad that Phil had them.
Yeah, they were really good to him. The impression that I got. And those Broadside tapes are a treasure. It's so nice.
At one point, I had all the Broadside tapes in my possession. Sis wanted so desperately to move to the country, and she found a house up in New Paltz that she thought they were going to move into. And while everything was going on, it was so crazy. I used to visit them. She said, "Here, take these, put them in a safe place." So I held on to the Broadside tapes for a couple of years, and then I ended up giving them back to her. But they never did move because Gordon had health issues, and he wanted to be near good hospitals, so he refused to leave Manhattan. That's the one thing I'm really sad about, because Sis would have been so happy up in New Paltz. It's a lovely place. But so I actually had all of the Broadside tapes at one
That's
point.
incredible.
Yeah. That's a treasure trove.
Yeah.
And you could always tell it was authentic. It was an authentic tape because they had a parakeet, and the parakeet sang along
Yeah.
with the performers. So many of the tapes had the chip 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 of the parakeet singing in the background. It was really funny.
Yeah, they're not demo quality, but they have this charm to them. Feels very
Genuine.
genuine. Yeah, that's a good word. Are there any songs that stand out on those tapes for you, that the songs that never really got a proper studio recording? You mentioned Hazard, Kentucky, and No Christmas in Kentucky.
I really don't know. I mean, I've gotten so many, I'm so confused at this point. Somebody sent me a tape of first 22 songs he said it was recorded in his house. Phil came to visit, and he put down 22 songs on a tape, And then I've got another one. There's a woman in Woodstock they were cleaning out her mother's attic, and they found a cassette that she asked me if I would like to have it. And of course I said yes, and it was dated May 8th, 1963. And I guess he'd gone into a studio in Woodstock and put a whole bunch of songs down. So I have that, so I have these odds and ends, plus of course the Broadside tapes. So it's all one big blur.
Yeah, just the non the non-studio things. I did really enjoy hearing these unreleased songs that I didn't even know existed. It seems like you think you know them all, and then another one pops up. And if you go on the Phil Ochs lyric index on the Phil Ochs website that was made way back in the 90s, there are all these titles and just these things that he would go in, and they're copyrighted with Bob Gibson, and you just wonder where they went. And
well, it's with any songwriter, I don't care. You keep putting out songs and putting out songs and putting out songs, and they're not all good.
Right.
And people say, "Well, that's a Dylan song, therefore it's got to." It could be a piece of crap, but because he wrote it, you know what I'm saying.
Well, Dylan wrote it, so.
And then there's the songs of Phil that I don't particularly like.
Oh, sure.
It's one that that annoys me is that I've Had Her.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that song. And another one that drives me crazy is Joe Hill.
Joe Hill, wow.
Oh, like 22 verses. I mean, hell, isn't that kind of overkill? And then he has the nerve after 22 verses to repeat the first one. Enough.
I like and appreciate Joe Hill, but
but edited.
Right. On Tape from California, it's almost out of place. There are many songs that I don't like, and you'll hear actually in episode 2, where we talk about I Ain't Marching Anymore. I realized how many of those songs just didn't strike a chord with me on I Ain't Marching Anymore, and I felt really bad for because that's some it's all subjective, and I know that's some people's favorite album, and they think it's amazing, and that's
you also have people who complain when songs are updated.
Right. Yeah.
Now, what's his name? Pat Wictor updated Knock on the Door. He threw in another verse about the war on terror. It's so powerful, because it's today.
Right.
I have no problem with updates. I think they're important, and some subtle changes here and there. For example, on There But for Fortune, Show Me the Ruins of the Buildings Once So Tall. Somebody changed that to Show Me the Ruins of the Towers Once So Tall. It's like, wow. Oh my God, it's like a punch in the gut, because they're talking about the Twin Towers.
Right.
But that makes it immediate. Another change that I love is on I Ain't Marching Anymore. You said that made me think of it. It's always the old who lead us to the war, always the young to fall. I'm not sure who it was. It might have been Tom Prasada-Rao. It's always the rich who lead us to the war. It's always the poor to fall. I mean, that is so strong to me.
It's true. It's
now if we sing it at a song night, we'll very often use it as a closing song. We do the first time we do the old and the young and the old. The second time we do rich and poor.
Right.
because that's powerful.
It is.
That's an important. Love Me, I'm a Liberal has been updated several times.
Yes.
Here's to the State of Mississippi has been updated. The most recent one was done by Wesley Stace, and he does Donald Trump, and it is a killer. I mean, it's a real another really great update. I'm not sure. I always thought Mary wrote the verse, but it might have been Peter from Peter, Paul, and Mary. They recorded There But for Fortune. And they have an extra verse in there that is so strong. Show me the famine, show me the frail, eyes with no future that show how we fail. And I'll show you the children with many reasons why they're but for fortune. Oh, you are right.
Wow.
That is so strong to me.
I'll show you the children with many reasons why I really like that.
So, I mean, I have nothing, I have no problem. You don't have to be a purist. I mean, these songs are there. Sing them, make people aware of them, but where it's relevant, throw in something, add something.
Right.
Why not?
People adding their own additions. Wow, that was redundant. People adding their own things to the music doesn't make the originals go away. It's they're still there to listen to and enjoy and appreciate. So I think I don't see any issue with that myself. So on the subject of politics, oh no, Mackenzie again wanted to ask if at all, how much did Phil's politics influence your own?
Well, quite a bit actually, because we grew up in a family that never talked about anything, as I said, and definitely not politics. I know that my parents were probably Democrats, The only thing I can remember political was when I was in high school. I remember walking through the living room and my parents were watching some old men talking on television. And what I found out later, because I didn't even realize what it was at the time, it was the McCarthy hearings.
Wow.
Okay, that's when I was in high school. I had no political leanings whatsoever. The first time I ever voted was in 1960. I voted for John Kennedy in the presidential election, and I remember when Eisenhower was president. I think it was the late 50s, and I didn't mind him. I thought he was okay. I had no problem with him. But I never paid attention. I never looked at a newspaper. I never watched the news. It was just totally not. So I guess Phil really did have an influence on me. And of course, in the 60s, when you saw the news, like from Birmingham, with people getting beaten in the streets and stuff like that, that gave me very strong feelings. I went on the March on Washington in 1963. I was on that march. And I went to every major anti-war demonstration in Washington and in New York City through the years. I went to many of them, and I felt very strongly about civil rights and also about the ending the war. Definitely very strong issues in my feelings. So I mean, that's when I became politicized, seeing how rotten people were being treated and seeing how we were sending young men off to get killed for no reason. As far as I was concerned, it was no reason. We should never have been in Vietnam.
That's true. I feel like the 60s are almost were a time where you couldn't be apolitical, and it's very similar now. It's
okay. Well, let's go back to the 60s. A couple of things that are very important. Number one, the most important thing of all, and it sounds insane, the most important thing of all was the draft. Okay? And that's why there was so much interest. That's why there were so many demonstrations, because it affected everyone personally. I mean, if it doesn't affect you personally, most people don't give a damn. They look the other way. And I'll never forget, there was a story about, I think it might have been the New York Times Magazine section. It was written by a Vietnam veteran who came back from Vietnam, and he went back to college, and his roommate was an anti-war demonstrator. And here he had been over in Vietnam, and he said the day he came back, he was shocked because he went somewhere like maybe to a bar or something, and it was like nobody even knew that there was a war going on. And here he had just come back from seeing his friends getting killed, and then he was in danger. And he comes back and people are partying and hanging out and like nothing's going on. And he said, I'll never forget this, he said, I respect my roommate. We totally disagree, but at least he knows that there's something going on and he's trying to do something about it. And that makes such a big difference. So the draft really affected people. So that's why there was so much demonstration, and that's why there was so much opposition to the war. And the longer it dragged out and the more kids that got killed, I mean, more people got involved. And I'll never forget one of the demonstrations I went to in Manhattan. Now, this is after it had been several years of demonstrations. We were in Manhattan, and there was this guy standing on the side of the road, and he was a hippie with long hair, and he was wearing a poncho, whatever. And all of the demonstrators, thousands and thousands of demonstrators, basically middle class, the guys wearing suits and women dressed up, and they all looked like really middle class. And I saw this guy in his poncho, and I said, you know something? That's who they're going to show on television tonight. They're not going to show these thousands of normal people.
Right.
And then it started to swing, and finally people got more and more disgusted with what was going on, and they started to do something about it. But it took a long time. It took much longer than it should have.
Yeah. While we're on anti-war demonstrations, how do you feel about Phil's participation in the War is Over demonstrations he organized in '67?
Well, that was a theater piece, really.
Yes, yeah.
It was a theater piece. The idea, that Lady Gaga recorded that song, sang that
Yes.
song. Yeah, it's on YouTube. But that was a theater piece. The idea being that if you told people that the war was over, imagine what their reaction would be. It would be a, wow, thank God, and real relief. So they decided to make almost like a theater piece out of it. They went to Los Angeles, they marched down the street carrying banners, the war is over, and singing and shouting that the war is over. And people on the sides who saw them thought that they meant it. And so they started to think, wow, wouldn't it be wonderful? What a great feeling. And it was so successful that they did it again in New York, in Manhattan. And that was just, like I said, just a theater piece to make people think about how wonderful it would feel if the war really were over.
You don't see experiments like that, protests that are more artistic or theatrical nowadays. Funny enough, the closest person or the closest example I can think of is maybe Sacha Baron Cohen and the things that he's done in movies like Borat, where through absurdity and by playing a character, he brings out sometimes the worst in people and just kind of shines a light on it. Do you think there's any merit in political theater like that in 2021?
Hey, there's no harm in it.
That's true.
Oh, I just thought of another songwriter who was a riot, Roy Zimmerman.
Roy Zimmerman.
Yeah, he is total humor and all political. He has an album called The Faucet's on Fire. It's about fracking, where they actually have had people where they're their faucets, the water actually got on fire from the chemicals that they're using in the fracking.
Good Lord. We're going to shift a little bit again in subject matter to more personal things. Myself, I struggle with my mental health, and because of that, I relate a lot to Phil, and I find a lot of comfort in his music, and I know a lot of other people who feel the same. How do you think he'd react if he knew that he'd reached people in this way?
I think he'd love. I haven't spoken about things like that, but I'm pretty sure that it would mean a lot to him, because he's a people person. He's trying to reach people, and if he reaches people through that medium, fine. It's because he had his struggles.
Right. Do you know when exactly he was diagnosed with manic depression or bipolar disorder today?
He really never wasn't. He never went to a doctor about it until the week before he killed himself. We all knew he was sick, and Cora Weiss, who was with Women's Strike for Peace, called me at one point during that winter before he came to me, and she said, "You've got to do something for your brother, because he's acting crazy. He's doing dangerous things. He's going to get hurt." And my brother Michael and I spoke about it, and we thought about putting him in a hospital. But Michael made the point, and he was right, was that the fact that, I don't know what the rules are now, but if you commit somebody to a mental hospital, they can sign themselves out after 48 hours. I mean, if they are not doing, violent things and stuff. And Phil was bright enough that he would be able to talk his way out. And he had said to Michael, "If you ever do that, if you ever put me in a hospital, I'll kill you." And he meant it. And so Michael said, it won't help him, it won't do any good, so there's no point in doing it. So we didn't, but I kept saying to Phil, "Look, you've got to get some kind of medication, you're really hurting." I said, "So how about if we find a doctor?" And he finally agreed, so he had an appointment, and we went to the doctor, and the doctor gave him a prescription for lithium, which was the only drug in those days for manic depression. And every night I'd say to him, "Phil, did you take your medicine?" And he'd say yes. And after he died, I found the bottle. He hadn't taken any of it.
That's rough.
Yeah.
So there's this recording. I think it was Dave Peller who shared it.
Yeah.
This last recording of Phil ever at Christmas Eve '75.
Dave gave me a copy of that.
Right. It's really it's kind of a bittersweet recording, because
Good description, yes.
right, you can hear there's some hope there. He's saying I should get back on stage, and in the description, Dave said that Phil was working on an album. The working title was "Duel in the Sun," and it was going to focus on his mental health and John Train. So he was pretty self-aware that there was something going on.
Mm-hmm.
A point that I forgot to make. Your father, Jack, was hospitalized a couple times as well when Phil was a kid. Do you think that might have scared Phil? Might be why he didn't want to be hospitalized?
No, they weren't long hospitalizations. When he was staying with me, I kept trying to get him to perform. A friend of mine's brother was running the Postscript Coffee House up at Columbia University. And he said, "Anytime Phil wants to come and do a set here, come and sing, he's welcome. He said, I'll fit him in at his convenience. And I kept saying to Phil, do you want to go up there and sing? He says, no, nobody wants to hear my songs anymore. I don't have any new material. I said, they do. They still love your songs, but he wouldn't go. And then Sisson Gordon from Broadside contacted me. Some folk festival in Europe wanted to hire him. I said, hey, Phil, this would really be cool, go over to Europe and do something different. No, he just wasn't interested in going out and performing. He was gone.
Yeah. So we started to get into it, but do you mind talking about Phil's final months at your house?
They were always the same. He never went in. He once in a blue moon, he would walk down the road to my mother's, and they'd go for a walk on the boardwalk. But that was it. He sat home just about all the time, didn't do anything. And when we came home from school, I was teaching, so when I came home from school and my boys came home, he always wanted to play cards. So the four of us would play our version of a game called Spades, or Spades is supposed to be the trump, and we played it. Whoever took the bid could call trump. It didn't have to be Spades. And we played it hours and hours and hours and hours. We played this game. And he had, I think, one or two visits. His friend Andy Wickham came and took him out for a ride out in Long Island. This woman named Keiko, who was a fashion designer from Japan, she came and stayed for a day or two, trying to cheer him up, and he just wouldn't cheer up. And then he wanted to, there was something going on at Shea Stadium, some kind of an event, some kind of festival or whatever, and Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman were there, and he wanted to go see them. So I took him there, and he apologized to Jerry for whatever, and he didn't need to apologize. Jerry didn't expect it. And I'll say this for Jerry Rubin, he was the best. When he saw the state that Phil was in that afternoon, he said, Phil, you need help. I have a friend in California who's a psychologist. I'll come with you right now. We'll get on an airplane. I'll take you out. I know he'll take you in, and let's see what we can do about this. And Phil wouldn't go. But I mean, Jerry, he would have literally walked away from what he was doing, which was important to him at the stadium. And he would have gone with Phil to California because he saw how bad he was. And then the week before he died, I talked to Jerry again, and Jerry he had a book coming out, and he was doing, the book publicity tour thing. He said, look, he said, I'm very busy, but he said, if you bring Phil in, I'll have dinner with him. I said, fine. So I drove Phil to Jerry's apartment in the city. And I said, I'm not going with you. I'm going to stay here at the apartment. I'll wait because I wanted them to have alone time, And so they had dinner together. And then they came back, and that was the last time Jerry ever saw Phil. And I knew, I would come home from school. If I didn't see Phil sitting on the couch, I'd run around the house looking for the body. I knew it was coming. There was no question. And finally, he did. He took his own life. And he hung himself in the bathroom. And it was, like I said, somebody said to me, she was a psychologist, a friend of mine, she said, how do you feel? This is the same day. I said, I don't feel anything. I feel numb. She said, well, aren't you angry? I said, angry? Why would I be angry? She said, well, look what he did to your son. My son David discovered the fact that he had killed himself. I said, look, he was hurting so bad that he wasn't thinking about anything else except his pain. And he needed to get rid of the pain, and I don't blame him, and I'm not angry at him. And that's how I felt, It's difficult. If a friend of mine's son just killed himself, and he had mental issues. It's a terrible thing for those who are left behind. But the person who does it has to be so desperate and so hurting to do something like that. And all they can think of is to get away from the pain, to get away from the pain. And then, of course, you say to yourself, maybe I should have said this, maybe I should have done it. It's not your fault. You didn't cause it.
Yeah.
You know, that's one thing. The two things you have to keep in mind, you are not to blame for his death, number one. And number two, he's better off because he's not hurting anymore. This was his choice. And in Phil's case, he was lucky because he made his mark. And it's proven now, 40-something years later, people still recording his songs. So he definitely made a mark.
Right.
So it was worth his being here.
Yeah. He did it while he was here.
Yep.
You talked about kind of hindsight, wondering what I could have done, what you could have done. And I think a lot of people, even people who were like myself, who were born 20 years after he died, thinking, what would I do if I had a time machine?
If I could go back, I would have put the pill in his mouth each night instead of taking his word for it.
He seemed to care a lot about his legacy and if his songs would survive. And they have. Beth, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but another podcast guest, Beth, asked, why do you think young people today are connecting with his work still?
Because the songs are relevant. They're talking about things we're still dealing with. We're still dealing with stupid wars. We're still dealing with racial injustice. He had a lot of songs about that. And so that hits a note. And there's one song we didn't mention that I think is so beautiful, Too Many Martyrs. And that's relevant now too. We're having too many martyrs, all these black folks who are getting killed by the police for no reasons. I mean, it's horrible. It really is. And who was it? Breonna Taylor, I think yesterday was the anniversary of her killing. That is horrendous. A woman in her own bed, and they come busting in the door. I mean, come on. There's definitely a double standard.
Certainly. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say to anyone listening right now?
Well, I can say that I'm glad you're listening to his music, and I hope you'll turn your friends onto his music, and make sure you teach your kids his music so it goes down another generation. And there are many songs that are really worth keeping in the public eye. And the main thing, do yourself a favor, check out some of these new performers that are out there. There's a wonderful show, I don't know if you're aware of it, there's a internet station called Folk Music Notebook, folkmusicnotebook.com, and it's on 24/7. And they play all kinds of music. They play different people's shows, like Rich Warren from Chicago, and Ron Olesko is the guy who does I can't believe how he programs this 24/7, and it's a complete mix of music. Some of it's political, some of it's bluegrass, some of it's traditional. I mean, it's just every kind of folk music that you could think of. And there's certain shows that I really like. I love Cheryl Prashker does an interview show every other Tuesday. She interviews people like, she did Pat Wictor very recently, and it's just very interesting. Joe Jencks is on there with a regular show. Oh, there's another songwriter for you, Joe Jencks, Jencks. He's very labor oriented, and he's fine. He's really fine. So that's another one you would like. And but folkmusicnotebook.com 24/7. You always get folk music, and it's free. It's there. And also, you might think about learning more about, there's a group called People's Music Network. That's been around since I think the late 70s, early 80s. And it's a collection of musicians who do nothing but political music. And they meet twice a year. They meet at a camp in June, and then they meet in different cities in January. And so you can check out what's coming up in June. And they get together and they have all kinds of workshops, and they have performances, and they sing political songs. And this is how they kind of network, and they learn each other's songs. And it's really a great connection. And it's a great way to find out about the new singers and the new songwriters. There, I've given you a whole...
Perfect. Perfect. Well, we can we can cap it there. I think I've exhausted my list here.
And you've exhausted your guest.
I've exhausted my guest. I'm so sorry, Sonny.
It's okay. You'll be 84 someday and you'll understand.
I wrung you out. Well, I hope I'm a fraction as cool as you are, so when I'm 84.
Well, I'm still lucid, and that's an accomplishment.
That's true. Yes.
Except for the minor blanks here and there. And I'm so glad you're doing this, Tori. I really am, and I appreciate it. Can't wait to see the finished product.
Me neither. And I of course appreciate you working with me on this. It really means a lot.
Well, your first podcast was terrific. I must say, you were really professional. So that's all. I hope you'll keep it up because you're good at it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll try. You've been listening to God Help the Troubadour, the eternal voice of Phil Ochs. This program was created by me, Tori Nelson, edited by me and Marie McCarthy, produced by Marie McCarthy. Special thanks to Sonny Ochs for everything she does. Learn more at soniochs.com. Music written and performed by Phil Ochs. Farewells and fantasies, folks.